Before you watch Christopher Nolan's version of the Odyssey, you need to understand something about its hero that most people have completely wrong. We remember Odysseus as the clever one, the war hero who just wanted to get home to his wife, the good guy of ancient mythology. But here's the truth nobody tells you. When Odysseus finally makes it home, after 20 years, the story doesn't end with a warm reunion. It ends with a massacre. He kills over 100 people in his own house, and then he orders the hanging of the servant girls. And the most disturbing part? For nearly 3,000 years, countless readers have continued to celebrate him as one of mythology's greatest heroes. Let me show you the Odysseus the poem actually describes, not just the one many of us were taught. Let's start with who he really is. Homer gives Odysseus a specific word over and over: Polytropos. It means the man of many turns, many twists, many tricks. Sounds flattering, right? Clever, adaptable, but sit with what it actually describes. This is a man defined by the poet himself as someone who is never straight with anyone. He lies constantly. He wears disguises. He changes his story depending on who's listening. When he meets the Cyclops, he says his name is Nobody. When he finally gets home, he spends the entire last third of the poem in disguise, lying to his own servants, testing his own wife, concealing himself from his own father. This isn't a side detail. It's the core of him. Odysseus is often seen as the original trickster, and many modern readers see the poem asking a question we still haven't answered. When does cleverness stop being heroic and become manipulation? Now here's where it gets dark, and I mean genuinely dark. While Odysseus was gone for 20 years, his house filled up with suitors, men who wanted to marry his wife Penelope and take his kingdom. Depending on how you count, there were over 100 of them. And they were not polite guests. They ate his food, drank his wine, disrespected his household, and plotted to murder his teenage son. So by the rules of that ancient world, they had it coming. That part most scholars agree on. But watch what Odysseus actually does. He doesn't confront them like a warrior. He disguises himself as a beggar. He gets inside. He locks the doors of the hall so no one can escape. And then he slaughters every single one of them, trapped in a sealed room, with no way out. The first one he kills is shot through the throat with an arrow while holding a cup of wine, not even aware he's about to die. This is not the clean, noble combat we imagine when we hear Greek hero. This is calculated, inescapable, total. But the suitors aren't even the part that should disturb you most, because after they're dead, Odysseus turns to the women. There were 12 maidservants in the house who had slept with the suitors. Now, here's a fact the poem doesn't want you to examine too closely. These were enslaved women, in a house occupied by aggressive, powerful men. Scholars who study the original Greek have pointed out something chilling. The text never actually makes clear whether these women chose those relationships, or whether they were coerced or assaulted. Think about that. Enslaved women, with no power, in a house full of men who took whatever they wanted. And their punishment for relationships, the poem presents as betrayal, despite the fact that many modern scholars question whether they could have meaningfully consented. Odysseus orders them to clean up the blood and the corpses of the suitors first, with their bare hands. And then he has them hanged. Homer even describes it, their feet twitching. He compares them to birds caught in a net, and the poem makes a point of saying they were not given a clean death. Uff. Let that sit for a second. And here's the double standard that makes it worse. And this is drawn directly from modern scholarship, not simply my opinion. For 20 years, Odysseus himself slept with other women. The goddess Circe for a year. The nymph Calypso for 7. He was unfaithful the entire time. There were 0 consequences for him. He's still the hero. But the enslaved women in his house? For relationships they may not have freely chosen, they die. The poem holds him to one standard, and them to another. And for centuries, many readers simply accepted that without questioning it. So how do we make sense of this? How is this brutal, lying, vengeful man the hero of one of the most important stories ever written? Well, here's where it gets genuinely fascinating. Because modern psychology offered one possible way of understanding what the ancient world couldn't describe in those terms. In 2002, a psychiatrist named Dr. Jonathan Shay, who spent 15 years treating Vietnam War veterans with severe PTSD, wrote a book called Odysseus in America, and his argument sent a chill through both the medical and the literary world. Shay argues that Odysseus doesn't behave like a typical mythic hero. He behaves like a trauma survivor, specifically, like a soldier who never truly came home. Look at the symptoms Shay identified in the poem, the same patterns he recognized in real combat veterans: an inability to trust anyone, explosive, disproportionate violence, danger-seeking behavior, womanizing, being visited by the dead. Odysseus literally travels to the underworld to speak with fallen comrades. Vagrancy, emotional numbness, paranoia so deep he won't even reveal himself to his own wife until he's tested her. Shay's point was devastating in its simplicity. Homer may have been describing, with remarkable insight, the kind of psychological wounds we now associate with combat trauma, and what happens when someone survives the war, but never truly leaves it behind. The massacre in the hall isn't necessarily a triumphant finale. Read through this lens, it becomes the story of a man so shaped by 2 decades of violence that he resolves a domestic problem the only way his shattered mind still knows how: through slaughter. The hero didn't come home. A weapon did. And that's the thing Homer understood that we're only now catching up to. The Odyssey was never really a story about a journey across the sea. It's a story about the far harder journey, the one back to being human. And the poem is honest enough to suggest that Odysseus may never have completed it. And even after reclaiming his home, the story isn't truly over. The cycle of violence continues until Athena herself intervenes to stop even more bloodshed. A reminder that vengeance, once unleashed, rarely ends on its own. So when you sit down to watch Nolan's version, watch for this. Not the monsters, not the special effects, watch the man. Watch whether the hero you think you're rooting for is actually a portrait of someone the war never let go. Because the real horror of the Odyssey was never the Cyclops, or the sirens, or the sea. It was what the journey turned the hero into. And the fact that, for nearly 3,000 years, so many people have still called it a happy ending.